Welcome to the Painting Coach, and today I'm going to show you how to paint Iridan the Witness for your Stormcast Eternal Army. This is a fantastic new centerpiece model from Games Workshop. I am so grateful to them for sending it out to me ahead of time so I can create all of this content. Now, the Witness will fight for those who have sacrificed everything in the name of the God King, and they're accompanied on the battlefield by the mighty Morrgryph Ariax. So, without any further ado, let's get painting. The first thing I've done is prime the model using black primer. You can use whatever black primer you like. I've also left it in separate parts. So the wings are off, Iridan is off, and I've also left that little bit of reins loose as well. The first thing we need to do is start painting up Ariax, the Morrgryph. So we're going to give this kind of a grey hue like you can see on the box art. So the first thing I'm going to do is take some Corvus Black. I'm going to dry brush this all over Ariax's body. Now, the Corvus Black is very similar to the black underneath, so you might not see it picking up, but this is all part of the layering to get some nice depth to some of the feathers on Ariax. And just take your time with this. You can be fairly messy because it's not going to go over any bits that we've already finished. Just make sure that you get some nice even coverage across the model. Next up, I'm going to do exactly the same using some Eshin Grey. And I'm going to do a little bit of a combination of stippling and traditional dry brushing. You can see I'm using a fairly big dry brush to do this, and again this is very similar to the previous step. We're looking to drag it along some of those feathers just to build up that texture and build up that colour so you can really start to get a read on the more grey tone that Ariax has got. I'm going to finish up the dry brushing using some Dawnstone, and this is going to be more of a traditional dry brush, dragging it along the shape of the model, catching all of the texture and raised areas. And you should start to see now that Ariax is starting to look quite grey, but also with some depth in some of those shadows areas. There's going to be lots of nice tones across the model. Once I'd finished that last stage, I thought that perhaps Ariax looked a little too grey, and it wasn't actually the kind of hue that I wanted. So what I decided to do was just give it a little bit of a blue tint. So to do this, I took some Drakenhoff Nightshade, and I mixed this 50-50 with contrast medium, and I brushed this all over the body, the feather, the wings of Ariax. And this gave me a little bit of a hint of blue on the underside. So it doesn't cover everything too badly. Make sure it doesn't pool in all the recesses. You just want to use this as a little bit of a filter, but do make sure that you get it into all of those little nooks and crannies so you don't have a bit that just looks a little bit different. Once that had completely dried, I went back to Dawnstone and again did a very light dry brush, looking to catch all of the sharp edges of the feathers again. And you can see here now that it's just leaving that slight hint of blue underneath, and we're getting a nice light highlight. So this really does help accentuate all of the fantastic detail, and this really does help accentuate all of the detail on Ariax. Next up, I wanted to paint slightly different colours on Ariax's tail feathers and the underside of the wings. So to get this started, I used some Gorthor Brown. Now, it did take 2 to 3 coats to get nice even coverage, but it is worth it because it gives us a little bit of interest on the model so that Ariax isn't completely black. I also used the Gorthor Brown to paint the front of Ariax's head, where he's got that lighter feather element as well. Next up, I took some Rakarth Flesh, and I stippled and dry brushed this over all the areas that I painted with Gorthor Brown. Now, I'm using a fairly small dry brush here because my other ones were just drying out after I'd cleaned them, but you can absolutely use a bigger dry brush here. It will be a lot more helpful. Generally, we're looking to cover all of these areas with that Rakarth Flesh. Next up, I did exactly the same thing using Pallid Witch Flesh, which is a nice brighter colour, and I made sure to catch all of the elements that are going to be lighter, such as Ariax's ears, as well as all of those feathers on the underside of the wing and around his neck. Once that was dry, I wanted to just give it a little bit of a shade to bring some warmth to it, so I took some Skeleton Horde contrast paint. I thinned this 50-50 with contrast medium and painted it all over the feathers and all over Ariax's head. Again, make sure it doesn't pool. We're just looking to add a little bit of a filter that runs into those recesses. When that was completely dry, I went back in with a dry brush and started highlighting up those areas. Not so much stippling this time, more that traditional dry brush, just catching all of the raised edges. I finished that up with a little bit of white. I used AK white. You can use whatever bright white you've got. Again, just focusing on the most raised edges that are going to catch the most light. Next up, I took some Abaddon Black and used this to paint over all the elements that I needed to tidy up, such as the beak, the claws, and Ariax's hood. To start highlighting the claws, I took some Dark Reaper, and generally I just pulled this along the shape of the model, catching those raised edges and sharp elements, just to make sure that I got nice crisp highlights. I also stippled the Dark Reaper towards the back of the beak, as if you look at the box art, then Ariax's beak goes from a yellow to a bluey dark colour and then to black on the tip. Next up, I took some Thunderhawk Blue and did exactly the same, dragging it along those sharp edges, but trying my best to keep it inside of the Dark Reaper from the previous stage. Again, when it came to the beak, I just stippled this towards the back where the hood and the beak meet, because this is where we're going to get the lighter colour coming through. To finish up the claws and the sharp parts of the beak, I took some Fenrisian Grey. I've not got very much of this on my brush at all, and generally I'm only looking to paint the tips of the claws, which are going to be the sharpest elements. And it's just to help them stand out against the rest of the model. To help with that colour transition on the beak, I took a 50-50 mix of Thunderhawk Blue and Avalanche Sunset. Now, this is kind of a greeny yellow, it's not a very nice colour, and I originally put a little bit too much on here, so I just went back over it with a little bit of that Thunderhawk Blue just to help blend it in a little bit. But generally, it's a very small area that we're doing with this, and if you want to put some more Avalanche Sunset on just by the hood, that can help punch it up as well. To finish off with the yellow, I just use Avalanche Sunset on the eye socket of Ariax, just following the box art there, to get that nice effect that just, again, adds more interest and colour to what is otherwise a black and white model. To highlight the hood, I decided to go for more of a warm colour, so I went with some Skavenblight Dinge as a first highlight. And generally what I'm looking to do here is catch all of the raised elements, all the folds. So you can use fair amount of Skavenblight Dinge for this. If you put too much on, you can always use some Abaddon Black to pare it back. Finally, I use some Stormvermin Fur, and what's key about this stage is you keep it inside the Skavenblight Dinge from the previous step, so it just gives that step up in highlights. Again, if you feel it's too sharp or you put too much on, you can always go back over it with the previous colours just to tone it down slightly. But again, these folds give you some nice elements on the model that will catch the eye on the tabletop. We'll move on to the metallics next, starting with the gold. And I'm going to use Dragon's Gold from Two Thin Coats. If you've got Retributor armour, that is absolutely fine. You can, of course, use that. Now, generally, we're going to have to be very, very careful on Ariax because we've painted a lot of elements that are finished. So we don't want to have to go over and correct any mistakes. But of course, we are going to start painting Iridan now as well. And we can be a little bit messier in terms of how we get all of the armour done because we haven't actually started on that part of the model just yet. To shade all of the gold, I'm going to use Reikland Fleshshade. Now, generally, we don't want to put too much on. We just want to get it into all of those recesses so we get some nice definition, some nice shading on there. Be careful that it doesn't pull too heavily. But if it does, you can always fix it with some more of your base colour. Again, on Ariax, we just need to be a little bit more careful, whereas on Iridan, we can be a little bit freer. To highlight all the gold, I'm going to use Glistening Gold from Two Thin Coats. If you haven't got this, you can use something like Liberator Gold from Citadel. Now, generally with this, I'm looking to highlight areas of the armour rather than do any edge highlighting. What I want to make sure is I get some nice bright elements. Now, generally on Ariax, there's not a huge amount because most of it's covered by the body. So it's generally the outside parts of things like the leg armour and the wing armour. On Iridan, again, you can be a little bit more expressive in terms of how much of the lighter gold you use because Iridan is sat atop Ariax, so it's going to catch a lot more light. I'll finish off the gold using some white gold from Proacryl. Now, if you haven't got this, you can mix a tiny bit of bright silver into your gold highlight. Not too much though, because it will go a little green. And generally, this is where I'm looking to do the sharp highlights. So this is where I'm dragging the brush across those sharp edges to get nice bright highlights. With the gold done, it's time to do the silver, and the colour I'm using is dark aluminium from Vallejo Metal Colour. If you haven't got this, you can use Lead Belcher or Surcoat Silver from Two Thin Coats. And generally, I'm just looking to base all the elements. So we've got that massive axe head. We've got a lot of chainmail on Iridan. And when it comes to Ariax, generally it's just things like the buckles and the clips on all the leather straps. To shade all of the silver, I'm going to use Nuln Oil. Again, on Iridan, you can be fairly free with this. Just be careful around the gold elements. And on Ariax, again, be careful around parts we've already finished because you don't have to go back in and fix any stains. To highlight the silver, I'm using Chrome from Vallejo Model Air. If you haven't got this, something like Shining Silver or Runefang Steel will work just as well. And generally, what I'm looking to do is drag this across sharp edges to get nice, crisp highlights. I can also use it to put some notches on the axe as well, where perhaps it's been knocked or it's been doing some chopping. For the chainmail, wipe your brush off and then just drag it across, and the texture will pick up the brighter colour, because otherwise you're going to run the risk of filling in where you've got that shading. I'm going to base all of the leather straps next. Now, there's quite a lot on Ariax, not so much on Iridan, but generally what we're going to go for is a reddy brown colour. So to that end, we're going to base it using Rhinox Hide, which is a nice dark reddy brown colour. And this covers quite nicely. You'll be able to get away with just one coat, because where it doesn't necessarily cover fantastically well, it's just going to give you a little bit of texture across the leather. We'll do a first highlight using Doombull Brown. And again, just thin this with a tiny bit of water, not too much, but where this is really good, it will blend down into the Rhinox Hide underneath. And generally, we're looking to paint the majority of the leather with this, just leaving the Rhinox Hide in the recesses. We'll finish off using Skrag Brown. Now, this is a nice orangey, reddy brown, and we're going to use it fairly sparingly. What we're looking to do is drag this along the sharp edges of the leather to get a nice crisp highlight and really sell that reddy brown leather effect. We can also use this quite sparingly to do some dashes inside the leather where it's going to give the impression of wear and tear. But like I said, do this fairly sparingly and make sure you haven't got much paint on your brush. I'm going to paint the blue cloak next, and to base it, I'm using Kantor Blue. I'm also going to use this to do all of the blue trim that Iridan has across the chainmail. So this should cover in 2 coats. You might be lucky and get it down in 1, but don't put it on too thickly. Take the time, because it's important to get a nice base. To start the highlighting, I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of Caledor Sky and Kantor Blue. Now, with this, we're looking to paint the majority of the cloak. We're only really looking to leave the Kantor Blue in the recesses, so we are going to use this quite a lot across the cloak. Of course, don't forget to do that chainmail trim as well. The first big highlight is going to be with Caledor Sky, and we're looking to paint this inside the previous layer, but again, this is going to cover quite a lot of the cloak. Now, the Caledor Sky will blend down into the mix underneath it as it dries as well, so be sparing and just, again, careful around those elements we've already finished. The first sharp highlight on the cloak is going to be with Teclis Blue, and generally we're looking to target all of the folds that are going to catch quite a bit of light. So in some areas you'll be able to drag the brush to get a crisp highlight, but in others we will just need to apply it quite carefully. We'll finish the highlighting on the blue using Lothern Blue. Now again, paint this inside the Teclis Blue from the previous stage. We're focusing on the folds. There will be times when you can drag the brush to get a nice crisp highlight, but we want to use this fairly sparingly, so it's always easier to go back in and add more if we need to. And what you'll start to see then is you should have a nice crisp blue cloak that really does stand out in contrast to the rest of the model. To paint the haft on Iridan's massive axe, we're just going to take some Mephiston Red. Now this is a very straightforward step. It's just key not to spill it across things we've finished, in particular that gold armour. When that's dry, we'll shade it using Nuln Oil, a really easy and straightforward step, but again, I have to re-emphasise, try not to get it onto the armour. When that's totally dry, we'll highlight using Mephiston Red, and there's quite a lot of texture on the haft, so what we're looking to do is to drag our brush along that to get a nice crisp highlight. Very easy and straightforward. We'll finish the red highlight using Evil Sun Scarlet, again doing the same thing, looking to keep it inside the Mephiston Red. Now there's a lot of texture, so it's a really easy step. Just be careful not to accidentally spill any. If you want to add a Wild Rider Red highlight on here, you can, but I didn't think there was need for it. To base all the scroll work, we'll take some Zandri Dust. Now again, to re-emphasise being careful, we finished that blue cloak, so just take your time and be careful applying the Zandri Dust. You will need 2 coats in some areas. You may even need 3 if you thin it a bit more. To start highlighting the scroll work, I'm going to use some Ushabti Bone. What I'm looking to do is draw horizontal lines across the scroll work. So this is going to give the impression of worn paper. Now, Iridan has got all of the memories of all of the Stormcast he's protecting on this scroll work. So it's a key part of the model. So let's just make sure that we put a little bit of effort into making it look nice and crisp. The last highlight is with Screaming Skull, where I'm going to drag the brush down the side of all the scroll work to get a nice highlight, and I'm going to just highlight any particular folds that are facing upwards. To do all the text, I'm going to use a 0.2mm micron pen, but you can also use a brush and black paint if you want. Next up, we're going to base all the smoke elements and any bits that are going to be white. The colour I'm using for this is Corax White. Now, it will take 2 coats to get a nice even coverage across the board. I forgot to do it in the video, but I did do it later. There's also the brooch on the right shoulder that needs to be painted white as well. Once the Corax White was dry, I took some AK White, which is a nice bright white. If you haven't got this, you can use White Scar or you can use Bold Titanium White from Procryl. I used this to just roughly paint over the smoke to give a little bit of differentiation in the colour so that when I put contrast paint on in the next few steps, it's going to just give me a little bit of a subtle change. For the Sigmar brooch on the right shoulder, I just used some Soulblight Grey to shade it. Very, very small amount here. And then I used some AK White just to highlight it back up to give some definition. For the axe head, I took some Aethermatic Blue contrast paint and painted this across where I wanted a little bit of a blue reflection, and particularly around those glowing runes. If I didn't say in the previous step, then paint those with a little bit of AK White so you get a nice bright background. Now it's time for the smoke, so we're going to work fairly quickly. So for the bottom elements, I'm going to take that Aethermatic Blue and paint it all over those areas. Now put this on not thickly, but you don't want it to be a nice thin layer, you want it to be a nice robust layer. Whilst that's still wet, take some Frostheart contrast paint and paint probably about the next half of the smoke and just let this flow into the Aethermatic Blue a little bit because as it dries, it will blend in quite nicely. Next up, we're going to use Leviathan Blue to do exactly the same. We're going to paint the majority of the smoke that we've got left. We're going to brush it into the Frostheart a little bit as well to help it blend down. Now, you may need to add a little bit more Frostheart on here just to help that blue transition. So if you need to do that, then feel free. We'll finish off with the tips of the smoke using some Black Templar contrast paint, a nice easy bit that'll blend into the Leviathan Blue. And we're also going to use this to paint the eyes on Ariax. Just be careful not to get this on the yellow elements. To finish the eyes, I just put a small dot of white in the back right corner. The last element is the timers that Iridan has on the axe. So what we're looking to do is take some Zandri Dust and just paint in where we think the sand would have landed if it's at the bottom of those timers. We'll highlight that with some Ushabti Bone. Now this is nothing more than a small line. It's nothing too heavy at all. So that's the sand element done. We'll finish the glass off by taking some Dawnstone and just dragging this along the sharp areas of the model. So this gives us a nice little bit of a crisp highlight where we think the glass is going to be reflecting. And I'm going to finish that off using a 50-50 mix of Dawnstone and AK White. If you've got Administratum Grey, you can use this. And all I'm looking to do here is just dot the sharpest edges to give me the impression of the glass. And with that, Iridan the Witness and the mighty Morrgryph Ariax are done. And I'm really chuffed with how they've come out. I think this is going to look fantastic on the tabletop. So thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment and a like down below. And make sure you check out all of my other Stormcast Eternal content. I've got quite a bit on the channel. So with that said, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.